China is once again criticizing the country staging a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Games. Its foreign ministry says those countries will pay a price for their, quote, mistaken acts. Canada, as you know, joined the boycott yesterday.
We are extremely concerned by the repeated human rights violations by the Chinese government. That is why we are announcing today that we will not be sending any diplomatic representation to the Beijing Paralympic Games this winter.
So Canada joins the United States, Britain, Australia, and Lithuania in this boycott. Other countries are also considering it. French and German officials say they're working on a position for the European Union as a whole. Canada and the other boycotting countries will send their athletes to the Games, which begin, by the way, on February 4th. And for more on this, our Chase team has reached Stephanie Carvin in Ottawa. She is an associate professor at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. She's also a former national security analyst with CSIS. Stephanie, let's get right to it. You know, you hear that Canada is joining this list of countries in the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Games, and then I think Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig. How can we ensure the safety of our athletes in China?
Right. Well, the issue is always going to be a challenge whether or not we decided to do a diplomatic boycott, right? Anytime you have an authoritarian regime, anyone who travels to that regime, whether or not they are an athlete, whether they are a government person, whether they're a business person, whether they're a tourist, they're going to be surveyed, right? A lot of these countries have software that will automatically download onto phones and their devices in order to potentially track them, their communications, anything like this. So that's kind of just par for the course.
But one thing, let me just add, that gets added into this mix now is the poke in the eye. We're not sending our diplomats. So before that, you know, yes, there were threats. I'm wondering if the threat's even more heightened now.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was where I was going with this.
Okay.
Absolutely. You're correct. The fact is that now that there is a diplomatic poke in the eye, it's entirely possible that there could be some kind of retaliation in the form of harassment, in the form of tracking, letting athletes know that they're being watched, following them around. I mean, this kind of sometimes happens anyways, and certainly we've heard reports from, you know, the 72 Summit series about athletes and bugs in their rooms and things like this. But yeah, I mean, authoritarian states do worry about, you know, how they're perceived. China certainly is perceiving this as a slight and maybe a symbolic gesture, but China cares about symbolic gestures. So I think athletes, I'm hoping they're going to get some kind of briefing on how to monitor their communications, like how to protect their digital devices. But also, you know, there could be you know, efforts such as, you know, what they used to call in the old days, slightly sexist, but honeypots, right?
Yep.
There could be, you know, attempts to socially engineer athletes to trust individuals who then betray that trust and try to compromise them in some way. And so, you know, there is a number of activities that could be of concern here. And as you suggest, the fact that this diplomatic boycott has now happened, Canadian athletes could indeed be further at risk.
Stephanie, you mentioned a really interesting point, and that is, you know, informing the athletes about, you know, what they shouldn't do, that kind of thing. Maybe that does go on. In light of this diplomatic boycott that Canada has joined, does that become even more important? And I'm not suggesting, you know, sitting down with all the athletes at once, but maybe team captains or whatever, having those conversations so that there is a protocol.
Well, CSIS does actually provide advice to individuals who are traveling abroad to these countries on how to protect themselves. I mean, I'm hoping that the Canadian Olympic Committee does make that advice available to those athletes. But yeah, I mean, ideally, the Canadian Olympic Committee should be reaching out to the government, requesting some kind of security briefing to the athletes, but also so the athletes can warn their families. I mean, I don't think we should really rule anything out after what happened to Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, right? I mean, I would find it, I don't think China is going to attack the athletes in and of themselves, but, you know, there's going to be a lot of other people there, spectators, journalists, you know, family members, that they may very well be seen as a different kind of target for an authoritarian regime to actually act on. So, you know, people who are going to Beijing should be aware that, you know, they will be applying for a visa. The Chinese government will know who they are. They'll know how long they're going to be there. They'll know the purpose of the travel, right? So it's going to be well known who they are, and they should be acting accordingly. And I certainly hope the Canadian Olympic Committee is reaching out for some kind of briefing from national security officials, because this is the kind of thing that athletes need to keep in mind should they decide to go and compete in the Games.
How important is on-site consular support as well?
It is, but as we know, that's not a guarantee, right? The two Michaels didn't get regular consular support. There's another detained Canadian. I mean, there's over 100 detained Canadians in China, one of them being Hussein Salil, and he's not even recognized as a Canadian by the Beijing government. He doesn't get any consular access. So, I think hopefully some steps are being taken to protect the athletes in their, I guess the compound that they're going to be staying at. But, I mean, there are both physical and surveillance risks to athletes who do compete in these games that may have been heightened in light of this diplomatic boycott.
Should each country be responsible for its own security, or should the IOC, should the host nation? And China has said, let me just find that quote, because the Department of Foreign Affairs spokesperson did come out and say that China is committed to offering up a streamlined, safe, and exciting Olympics to the world. So when they make this pledge, who do we hold to account? The host nation, the IOC, the individual nations who are attending with their athletes?
That's a great question. So, I've heard Dick Pound, who's a representative of the International Olympic Committee, say that, when the Olympics are held in these countries with problematic human rights records, that they are required to sign a contract to say that they will not engage in any kind of those malicious activities. I mean, I'm not really convinced it works. And I mean, we've seen other states break the rules before, like Russia, when it came to doping. And it really didn't suffer any consequences for those actions, right? So the Olympic Committee is not really great at holding these countries to account. I mean, technically they would be. I mean, I strongly suspect China will not want to go out of its way to upset the International Olympic Committee, but if it comes to an issue of national interest versus its reputation with the International Olympic Committee, I have no doubt that China knows what it's going to pick, and it's not going to be worrying about a bunch of bureaucrats in Switzerland.
Right. Great to talk to you, and we'll do it again, okay? You be well.
Thank you so much.
Former national security analyst Stephanie Carvin, she is in Ottawa.